An if statement is basically just a conditional statement that checks whether or not a condition is true or false, and depending on that will execute a set of code. How to write a basic if statement is if some condition, open curly bracket, close curly bracket, else, open and close curly bracket again. Inside here, this code will execute if condition is true, and this code will execute if the condition is false. So for example, if we have a variable some var equals 4 and another variable some other equals to 10, just to demonstrate this if statement, we could say if some var is less than some other, else do something else, and we're simply just going to log to the console some var is less than some other, and if not, something else happens. So when we run this set of code without the demo up here, we're going to run this code and we get some var is less than some other. This will not execute since this statement is true. If we reverse the numbers, or rather just make some var greater than some other var, then this will no longer be true and this one will execute. That's the basics of an if statement. Functions are the basic building blocks of any programming language. What a function is a set of commands that can be executed at will, basically. A basic function definition would be function some name, whatever you would want to name your function, and then open and close parentheses, open curly bracket and close curly bracket. This is a basic function definition. Everything that goes inside these open and closing curly brackets is your code to be executed. So for example, if we just log console.log running function some name, and then to call a function so that these commands will execute is you just call the function name, which in this case is some name, and then open and close parentheses with a semicolon at the end. So now when we call this, it's going to run this function and execute these commands. When we run the code, you see running function some name and an end. That's pretty much it for now for functions. We'll get into the parameters at the end, since I have it written down there. Switch statements. Switch statements you can think of as several different if statements written nicely. Basic switch statement will look as like this: switch parameter, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. Then inside you're gonna have case. Whatever number you put here next is basically saying if this parameter being evaluated is equal to that, then execute this line of code. So let's say we have case 4 colon break. The break is the end of the commands that will execute if this statement is true. If this parameter is equal to 4, then these commands will execute until break. So we will log parameter is equal to 4, and then you can have as many case lines that you want. Case 10 break, case 200 break, and one special one called default that will execute if this parameter does not equal any of your case statements, any of your case values. It's going to automatically default to this set of commands. So just to demonstrate how this will work as a switch statement, I'm going to set this parameter, var parameter equals 10, and then this code will execute. The switch statement will evaluate the value of this variable passed in, the parameter, and then it's going to check the case statements. If it finds one, it's going to log whatever code to be executed in between the case and the break. And if it doesn't find it, it's going to run the default set of commands. So in this case, we have 10. It should run console.log parameters equal to 10. When we run the code, there it is. We switch it to 200. It runs at 200. The other set of commands do not get executed. And then if you have a number that doesn't exist in your case values, then the default set of commands will run. That's basic use of a switch statement. Functions and parameters. Going back to how we read a basic function definition. Some function name looks like that. Now, just how the switch statement evaluated a parameter that was getting passed into it. Functions can have parameters, variables, objects, whatever you want that can get passed into them so that you can use them inside your function. So for example, this some function name, we're going to change it to subtract 10, just to give an example. Any name that you pass inside these parentheses is going to be how you refer to that variable inside this function. So if you say that the first parameter that this function is going to accept will be named some number, then whatever variable that you pass inside this subtract 10 function, when you call at the end, we're going to call subtract 10 200. When this executes, you could think of it as soon as this happens, it's going to set var some number equals 200. That's basically what's automatically happening when you're passing a value or any data, any object inside of a function. And then just to see, we're going to log some number. So we're calling the function, passing it in a value of 200, and storing that value automatically into whatever parameter name that you give it up here. So in this case, some number is going to return 200. If you put y, and then you log y, it's still going to log 200 down there. A good practice is that whenever you're working with parameters that you're going to modify that are getting sent into the function, in this case if we have 200 and then we wanted to first subtract 100 from it, and then for some reason we do another modification right after it, multiplied by 3000, etc. However many modifications that you're going to do on this parameter being passed into the function, instead of doing the modifications directly to the parameter, and what I mean by that is that you're passing it in it, storing it as yy, and then you're saying yy minus equals, which is the same thing as yy equals yy minus 100. you're doing that, and then again you're calling yy, the parameter that's being stored up here. Instead of doing it like this, a good practice, and it's faster code when your code executes, is to store the parameter that you're receiving into your function into what would be called a local variable to this function. We'll get into more of that later. I think the next video I'll make a section on that. But all it is basically inside your function, subtract 10, you're passing this parameter. What you want to do is, as soon as the function runs, the first line of code, you're going to set a variable. We'll name it t, just for demo purposes. Var t equals yy. Alright? Make it more number being passed in. Okay? We have a number being passed in. We're going to set, num pass equals the number being passed in. What this does is stores a variable inside your function that's going to be equal to whatever value that's being passed into the function. And then after this line, instead of modifying how we did it at the beginning, yy and yy, and in this case it's going to be number being passed in and number being passed in, instead of modifying that parameter directly, we're going to modify this new variable that we made inside your function. So instead of number being passed in minus equals 100, we're going to put num pass minus equals 100 and num pass multiplied equals 3000. That's again just good practice, and it's faster code. We'll get into more details on that later, but just for now, just every time that you're passing in a variable and you need to modify it, store it as a local variable inside the function before modifying it. Right now, if we run this, nothing's going to happen. Well, something is going to happen, but nothing's going to get written back to the user or to you. So it's going to run and it's going to do the multiplication, but nothing's going to happen. If we want to trace, meaning write this to the console, we can do it several ways. One of two would be just log here, console.log numpass. So now when we run this, it's going to give us the answer to that right here. Or we can also return the value. Functions have a method called return, or an action called return. And what return does is just basically, as soon as you run the function, it's going to return that value as this. To explain it better, we're going to return numpass, right? So now when we run this, run code, you'll see that nothing comes in the console because we're not logging anything. But this value, after it executes, is now going to be 30,000. So if we wanted to see that in the console, we would just log, console.log subtract 10 200. Which subtract 10 doesn't make sense because we're multiplying it by 3000, but either way we're going to run the code and then we'll see that's 300,000 is output on the console. So that's what the return does inside a function. Another way of looking at it would be that if we store another variable, var myAnswer is equal to, we can set it equal to the function call subtract 10 and pass in whatever value that we had before. So now when we're executing this function, a similar thing is happening, but now we're storing the result of this into this variable. So now when we log myAnswer, we're still going to get 300,000 down in the console. We can also pass in entire functions as parameters to functions. To demonstrate that, I'll just write a function test function call, and then we're going to pass it g as the parameter. Inside the function, we're just going to execute g open parentheses, close parentheses with a semicolon, and then we're going to write another function, say something that's simply just going to log to the console something. So now, if we run say something directly, it's going to run something, right? If we run test function call and we pass it say something, and notice that we're not passing the both parameters into here, we're just passing the name of the function and we have it defined already. So now what's going to happen is that this test function call is going to receive the name of the function and it's going to try to execute it. And then, I'm going to write something else in here and run the code and see that it works. You can run functions, inside functions, and return functions, but that's later. You can also pass strings, you can pass arrays, you can pass pretty much anything that you want. And that's basic functions and parameters.